Welcome back and thank you for staying with Inside Politics, your number one premier Sunday political show. Of course, we're taking a look at the latest developments that have happened throughout the week, starting with the 10-point Azimio manifesto that was launched earlier on this week. Just to read some of the replies on social media briefly, Alex Mayore says, I followed the Azimio manifesto launch and to me it was like a poem being read. I almost fell asleep. I didn't hear any solutions. It was about the what without the how. That's one comment. Mwasi Mwai says, Mukua is continuously missing a point on financing. It has been said by one of the panelists, and I will repeat. Cliffridge mentioned by two reliable sources. The Auditor General acknowledges a third of our 3 trillion budget goes to graft, and Uhuru mentioned, it has been mentioned by other panelists as well. And one more just briefly, Murunga says, Mukua, you're right. Let Raila be strong on issues of economics and deal with Cliffridges and corruption. Development plan is the bare minimum. Gentlemen, 1 minute each, just to perhaps reply to what Mukua said before the break as we shift focus to the 12th Parliament. Does it answer the how?
To a large extent, manifesto is not a work plan.
Okay.
So it gives that overarching picture of what a political party that is looking at assuming power will do once they get to power. But I can say, without any fear of contradiction, that reading this document, there is intent on how they are going to implement this. Dismas has talked about how will it's not the business of the government to set up industries and factories. And this document has not say that they are going to set up.
All right.
It has just talked of how they are going to institute a mechanism between the national government and the county government to maximize on the resources and the policy framework. And where there is no policy framework, come up with a policy framework that will enable players to do that. And then number two, to ensure that if that policy is not there, there is a legislative framework to anchor that policy.
Right.
But most importantly, if you ask, where are we going to get this money? Corruption is just one of them. But a government will be in power for 5 years. So this is a very productive kind of manifesto. And if in the first year you invest money in production, rest assured that in the second year, because of the people you'll mainstream into the productive industry and the consumption that will be attendant, you're likely to generate more revenues. So it is something that is going to be very successive in terms of more money coming into the coffers and more money being reinvested. And the economy is very simple. It's a question of production, demand, and supply.
As you mentioned.
Yes. And if you create that, you'll make money.
Osido, briefly.
Kenya has a very wonderful vision. It's called the Vision 2030. In my view, I don't think I would advise any politician in Kenya today to think outside the box in terms of what is not enshrined in the Vision 2030. And so what, in my view, the Azimio la Umoja manifesto has done is to borrow from the vision by breaking it down into social, economic, and political aspects. And remember that even as we are speaking today, the vision is actually alive. And it goes further to break it into what we call the medium-term frameworks, which really the National Treasury and various ministries and government agencies always emphasize on citizens to be able to attend the conversations and make their proposals. And the budget is done through those kind of conversations and recommendations and proposals that citizens make. Number two, it is important for us to also note that even as we talk about these manifestos that are being done, the Constitution has narrowed down on national government functions and county government functions in Schedule 4. So we also need to be worrisome or careful about national government trying to usurp responsibilities or powers from county government. And if you look at the Azimio la Umoja manifesto under Ugatuzi, they've actually indicated that they will push for a complete devolution of functions, which we have not seen happening. And then lastly, remember that the bare minimum of governance and leadership is the people. So we should also not really focus on just the economics, but also looking at the social cohesion, mechanisms within which all these governments are going to enhance citizens' places. And I think for me, looking at what Azimio la Umoja has proposed under Ugatuzi and also under Viwanda and Ukulima, it more or less presents their aspiration and their ambition, so that if it excites Kenyans to vote for them on 9th of August, then they've already told us what they will do. And that really for me would be the major reason for any manifesto. It's not for you to break down like what this mass is seeking us to do, like a work plan or a project, but it's really to show the dream and the vision, the kind of vision that you have for the people.
Well, Let's move forward, away from manifestos and promises. Let's evaluate the 12th Parliament scorecard. And just this week, they officially broke camp in one or the other, except for a special instance where the Speaker will call for a special sitting. But just like in previous parliaments, National Assembly's 12th Parliament had its own fair share of intrigues and pivotal moments that greatly impacted on its business. Duncan Haimba takes a look. Listen in.
The 12th House of the National Assembly began on a controversial note on 31st August 2017, being the eve of the Supreme Court ruling of the 2017 presidential election petition. President Uhuru Kenyatta had convened the first sitting of the House as per the Constitution, but the opposition alliance NASA protested the move, although its elected lawmakers had no choice but to attend the session for their swearing in. The next battlefront was the formation of committees, whereby ruling Jubilee Party had an upper hand in dictating committee membership, save for the two watchdog teams of the Public Accounts Committee and the Public Investments Committee, whose leadership is a preserve of the minority party.
I've been attacked in this house by the master of violence in this house, Mr. Speaker.
The bad blood between the majority Jubilee Party and the minority NASA saw powers that be.
We have seen them before. We will overcome this as well.
Order that Homa Bay County Woman Representative Gladys Wanga be kicked out of the powerful Parliamentary Service Commission for being too critical against the government. 7 months later, President Kenyatta and then NASA leader Raila Odinga buried their political hatchet on the 9th of March 2018, the famous handshake that would later shake up things in the National Assembly. Parliamentary leadership and committees were reshuffled in order to accommodate the newfound love between Jubilee and ODM leader. Garissa Township Member of Parliament Edon Duale was among the handshake casualties when he was replaced by Kipipiri's Amos Kimunya as majority leader in the National Assembly. Majority Whip Benjamin Washiali from Kakamega County was kicked out and replaced by Emmanuel Luangwe from the same Kakamega County in an act of balancing political interests. Chris Wamalo from Ford, Kenya was removed as a deputy minority whip and his position handed to another Ford, Kenya member of parliament, then Dr. Eseli Simiyu. Jubilee also surrendered two crucial committees which are a preserve of the ruling party to ODM. Gladys Wanga was elected chairperson Finance and Planning Committee, while Florence Mutua took over the leadership of the Education Committee. The cooperation saw once sworn enemies Jubilee and ODM form a lethal tag team that ensured nearly all government businesses sailed through effortlessly. The culmination being the amendment of the Political Parties Act that gave birth to the Azimio la Umoja Coalition Party.
Order members.
As the two dwarfed the Tanga wing of Jubilee that acted as the new opposition. The life of the 12th Parliament officially comes to an end, bringing with it a cocktail of outcome from order, controversies, efficiencies and inefficiencies, and to some extent some members who will exit without having contributed or uttered a word on the floor of the House apart from the day they were sworn in. Duncan Haimba, KTN News, Nairobi.
Okay, so that story by Duncan Haimba encompasses the wins and perhaps the shortcomings and the shortfallings of the 12th Parliament. Let's start on that particular note. Dismas Mukua, what do you think Morale back in the village is saying as she evaluates the scorecard of the 12th Parliament? Oversight, legislation, representation and whatnot.
You've named the three key roles of a member of the National Assembly or even a senator. But it seems to me the majority of the members of the National Assembly and Senate do not actually understand their job description. That's why you see them every single they say tunaomba serikali, then you begin to wonder, do they actually understand their role? And for majority of the members of the National Assembly, the only thing you can write home is CDF, because CDF has really had a profound effect on morale back in the village, because she feels the CDF, and especially if it has been well run. So that's when you can give them credit.
Okay.
But number two, when you come to oversight, the National Assembly has got very serious challenges on oversight, because it seems to me that they don't understand the role of the majority and the role of the minority. There is a certain phobia of offering oversight to the national government. And it's, for some reason, people imagine that when you take a position which is not aligned to your party leader, then you're being a rebel without a cause, or you are being dishonest, and you get punished. And it seems to me that for the National Assembly has actually been run not by members of the National Assembly or Senate, but by party leaders who give very strict positions on policy issues, and all the members are expected to be in a nice, neat, straight line. The moment you don't do that, you get kicked out of those important committees, and you get de-whipped, and you could even be expelled from a political party.
Yeah.
So in my view, if we want to make progress as a nation, the National Assembly must be aligned and understand that in fact they are a national assembly. That the National Assembly in Kenya, it's no longer made by opposition or non-opposition. It's minority and majority. And their responsibility is not to serve the party leaders. Their responsibility is to serve morale, so that everything they do at the National Assembly is aligned to morale's interest. Now, times above number, and a number of members of the National Assembly have said this as much, that wherever there is a critical motion or a critical bill, there is a number of khaki envelopes which exchange hands in the bathrooms. So this becomes a source of concern that these members of the National Assembly are merely mechanical, because they vote with a pecuniary interest in mind and not the interest of the people they were sent to represent. You've got a parliamentary budget office. But what do these members of the National Assembly do? They keep on saying tunaomba serikali. When the National Treasury comes up with the proposals, they hardly turn it upside down to make sure that the resource allocations are aligned to our national and public interest. And we've mentioned in this show time above number, and even Will alluded to it about governance. How come, and members of parliament have admitted this, that corruption begins at the National Assembly, at the budget making process. Members of parliament have admitted this. These are not my words. How come then, how come then we don't have a zero-based budgeting, so that every cabinet secretary, every principal secretary, at the beginning of every financial year, they justify, they say these are our projects, and this is the amount of money we are looking for. So what has happened? The president said that we lose 2 billion shillings every day. What did the members of the National Assembly do? They opened champagne bottles and went to address public rallies saying that the president has been unable to kill corruption, yet they have that sole and principal responsibility.
Okay, so it's an interesting 12th parliament, because we've definitely seen the erosion of the majority and minority. Hesbon, as you give us your scorecard of the 12th parliament, from your honest evaluation, do you think the handshake did make governance worse?
Well, that's a very heavy question.
Sorry,
Let me answer it as someone who has experienced the wrath of being, on the other side of the political favor.
Okay.
It has done a lot of good for Kenyans. Now, look at it this way.
Governance.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. In 2013, when Jubilee won the election and they formed the government, they essentially divided this country into two, the Cod region and the Jubilee region. And I think to a large extent, that is how government was run. Members of the ruling elite at some point were just gloating in parliament. I remember one majority leader saying that I've become the majority leader before the son of Jaramogi became the president. And I think it was just unfortunate that the 12th parliament, the 11th parliament was a lot more chaotic, so to speak, in terms of the antagonism between the minority and the majority. And we know what happened when they were passing the Security Act. We saw the drama in Parliament. So did that drama end in the 12th Parliament? I don't think it did. There was still a lot of drama, and Dismas has alluded to other issues that we can speak to, especially issues of oversight. I think to a large extent, you can say that oversight is a very dicey situation, and on a score of 0 to 10, you can talk of the best they could get in oversight is actually 3. For the simple reason that the first part of the second term of the Jubilee government, to a large extent, there was that, push by majority of the Jubilee members who are aligned to a certain political formation, who are hell-bent on an agenda that was a lot more political than an agenda that was to deliver on the promises that they made to Kenyans. Right. As a matter of fact, they had a very fantastic manifesto. But what do you do as a political party that has formed government and you have representatives in Parliament who are not giving you that, legislative underpinning to execute everything? Look at NHIF, look at housing. I mean, members of the Jubilee coalition actually failed this government on what they had promised Kenyans. And if you are the leader of that political party, now you head the country, not just the executive, you're the head of the country. You've got a responsibility to rise up, and do what is good for the country. Okay. And I think that is the situation that we found ourselves in. Yeah. And if you ask me if they delivered on that, they did. There are certain issues that they probably score very poorly in terms of legislation, including the 2/3 gender majority rule and BBI. I mean, if BBI was a good thing, because they passed it in Parliament, then they had a responsibility to advise the proponents of the BBI a lot more robustly to ensure that it doesn't fail at any point. They did. But let me tell you, Kenyans should not be deceived that members of Parliament in the current political dispensation that we have will, outdo themselves as far as legislation is concerned, will outdo themselves as far as oversight of the executive is concerned. This is something that is cultured in a democracy, and we are still very far, from having that independence in oversight and independence in legislation. Okay. It will still be ruled by the political bigwigs. All right. But where I fault Parliament is here, because Parliament has a representative role, and there are MPs who have CDF, and I can tell you, and not many people know this, that up to 2021, all members of Parliament had access to 137 million every year. They keep complaining that we are never given this money, But you see, the role of an MP is very simple. Once the committee at the constituency level comes up with projects, it is the MP to ensure that those projects are funded by the national government CDF board. So if that money is not delivered and they're not doing the work in Parliament, because that is where MPs can make a difference. I come from Suna East, and my MP has done a lot, and I think that is where we need to look at what MPs are doing. Where is that 137 million going? Okay. Any other constituency, that is very critical.
Okay, quite so. Oside, as you add your voice to this, we're talking about the cost of living right now. And if you run it back, one way or the other, this 12th Parliament, due to the passing of laws, we saw an increasing in taxation, and subsequently, the cost of basic goods and services definitely went through the roof. Talk of the debt ceiling that was raised just recently. What's your evaluation, bearing those things in mind?
Jesse, members of the 12th Parliament, particularly the National Assembly, have not helped Kenyans. And I say this so that I say that in line with the examples that you are giving, it is really the responsibility of a member of National Assembly, my MP, to raise my concerns. Because if we had all the 58+ million Kenyans going to Bunge, and we have tried this, including taking pigs and saying pigs and all these things, but the voices of the common citizen or citizens of Kenya have never been heard. But yet, laws on debt management is done on the floor of the National Assembly. The tax regime, conversations around taxation are actually heard at the National Assembly. Security concerns, oil and gas, these are conversations that actually take place at the floor of the National Assembly. But unfortunately, it is difficult, even as Mr. Haimba does the story, to focus on one or two MPs who raised issues around why do we have heavy debts. They only talk about it in rallies. It's difficult to pinpoint one of the many MPs out of the 350 of them plus the speaker who actually raised concerns around oil and gas. Who is this individual who actually came up and said, can we reconsider the tax regime? Can we reconsider the cost of living, the cost of unga, for example? But do you know why this is happening? Yes, it is because our taxes actually make them feel comfortable. And so when they have security around them and they have all these loans that they can be able to use to take the big vehicles and also their housing loans and feel comfortable and take their children to schools probably outside this country, that really, in my view, presents an opaque way of looking at what the common citizen is going through. So my verdict on the 12th Parliament probably I would say is highly self-focused. It is very economically and financially transactional, because we have had stories of where as much as 3,000 shillings was being given to members in toilets. How does that really respond to concerns around negative 9.6 trillion of our debt burden as a country? Questions around infrastructure, where the president has actually come and said, I will release papers of SGR within the next 2 years. It's difficult to pinpoint a single member who actually raised these issues on the floor of the House and said, Your Excellency, as an oversight role of the members of the Parliament, we are pushing you to show Kenyans and share this information. So I think as we head towards elections, it is important for Kenyans to look at performance, roles and responsibilities, and how we can therefore be able to hold our leaders to account.
But do Kenyans drop the ball? Does Murad drop the ball at any point? Because we usually hear 60% of these members of parliament will not be going back at the end of the day. Are we holding them to account in terms of perhaps the CDF funds and how they've used? And equally, as you add on that, you know, there's a House of Lords and House of Commons. How would you compare perhaps the Senate and the National Assembly separately?
You know, number one, you've raised very germane issues. That the role of the National Assembly, number one, you are supposed to witness intellectual catfights, policy catfights, so as to reduce the cost of living in Kenya, to make Kenya very competitive. And everything is supposed to be aligned to our national and public interest. Mature democracies thrive in that space. That the member for National Assembly, number one, their fidelity and their loyalty is not to the party leader. It's supposed to be Mora, the voter. But in Kenya, that does not happen. The many members of parliament, and the turnover is extremely high, anything up to 80%, they lose their positions, not based on meritocracy. No, the average Kenyan voter, again, Mora, is emotional and irrational. They are not penalized on meritocracy. It's a party wave. I mean, you see what has happened to the MP called Alfred Keter, who tries to speak to his, I mean, he represents his people, he's very vocal, he goes against the party position. But what happens during the party primaries? Such kind of people are given a thorough beating. They're disciplined. Because what Mora wants to do is to ensure that they're aligned to the party leader. You start raising these issues, you get a beating. So in my view, we've lost it completely. Now there's an MP called Sakwa Bunyasi who came up with a proposal on public debt management, which was going to make this issue very transparent, so as the national government can answer several questions. Why do you go for commercial borrowing instead of concessional lending, so that there's a bit of transparency?
All right.
The bill has been on ice for the last 5 years. One wonders how the House Business Committee did not prioritize that. So in my view, the elephant in the room is the overbearing influence and power that party leaders have over the various components of the National Assembly. Wherever there's a serious motion in the National Assembly, the party honchos would be making phone calls and giving them direction.
So MPs, perhaps at the end of the day, pledge allegiance to the party leaders rather than Mora and Wanjiko.
Just to buttress that point, a number of them have passed many pieces of legislation without even reading the content. So when it has become law, or when it's been rejected, or when the High Court has said it's unconstitutional, then they get shocked, like the rest of Amura, that, wait a minute, how did this happen?
Okay, well noted. We'll be back with more contributions, but just taking a look at some of the contributions on social media. Kalistas Murunga says the 12th Parliament was a letdown. I give them 2 over 10. They only cared for their needs and not our needs. The MPs have been there to serve their party leaders and not the people they represent. Taking a look at yet another one. 12th Parliament failed terribly because of sycophancy and corruption. Let's elect sober and people with integrity with valid papers. That's Sebastian Kulabi. Well, interesting. Allow us to take a short break right now. When we come back, we take a look at the tough balancing act ahead for IEBC. With roughly 50 or so days to go to the general election, we'll interrogate some of the promises they've given Kenyans in terms of a free, fair and credible election and some of the bumps along the road they've faced. Stay with us.